Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Today we're going way back to the year 1754, where both France and Britain had thriving colonies in North America. However, there's a deadly confrontation between the French and its Native American allies, and it sparks a world war that engulfs North America, Europe, and India. Today we're talking about 1754 Conquest, the French and Indian War. This is from Academy Games. It's for 2 to 4 players. It takes 1 to 2 hours to play. Today we're going to be doing a rule school, so I'm going to teach you how to set up and play the game rule for rule so you don't even have to look at the rule book. So let's get going. In 1754 Conquest, French and Indian War, you'll be taking on one of the 4 factions from the different sides, the British or the French. On your turn, you'll be selecting 1 movement card and optionally playing any event cards. You'll be moving into areas with the natives to ally with them and help them fight your cause. And you'll be moving into enemy territory to try to take them out, but watch out, some of them have extra defense as forts. Some units will flee in battle, but you'll get them back later on your next turn. Sometimes you'll get some direct hits, and other times you'll be able to move out of a battle. Each faction will get to play every round, but they're never sure as to when their turn is going to be, and you'll play between 3 and 8 rounds depending on how fast a truce might come. To set up, players will select factions. There's 2 sides of this game. On the left side we have the French, and there's 2 factions within the French regulars and the French Canadians. On the right side we have the British side, and those are made up by the British regulars and the British colonials. This game is for 2 to 4 players. You'll split up into 2 teams, and each player from the same team will take one of the factions. So if you're on the French side, one of you will take the French regulars here, and the other will take the French Canadians, and likewise for the British side. If you're playing 2 players, then both players will run both factions of each side. If there's 3 players, one of you will run both factions from one side, and the other 2 players will each run a faction from the other side. You'll also take the dice that go along with the cards. Each faction also has their own units, which are these cubes. Right now I have them neatly placed inside the box insert. You can leave them here and take them as needed, or you can take your faction's units and place them in front of you. We haven't talked about the green Native Americans yet. We'll talk about them later. Next, we'll go to unit setup, where each place on the board that has a colored unit cube, you'll place them there. So in this case, there's 1 red cube here. Even ports need cubes, so we have a red, white, and this port with an anchor, and the other side will get some too. So every place on the board that you see different colored cubes, you'll place them there. Here we see the green ones, which are natives, and you'll place them just as the other cubes. You'll do this for every region over the entire board. And note that these icons are only used for setup. They're not used for anything else for the rest of the game. Next, we're going to place control markers. You'll notice the board has 3 main colors throughout it. It has purple, which are essentially home to the French. You have the red, which are home to the British, and you have green, which are home to the natives. You're going to look for every green region that has a victory symbol. It looks like this starburst here. Whatever side starts there, that's what side that will get a control marker, and you'll place one right over the starburst. So since this is a native area and it's owned by the British, it will get a British. This one here is owned by the French, and so is this one. You'll do this for every green region that has a victory marker. These control icons are basically flipped depending on who owns it, so you just put the right side on the right victory spot. Next, we'll place forts. You'll notice on the board, there's actually 6 different forts. They all start with Fort, FT period, and then a name, in this case, Fort Halifax. They'll have either a red or a purple background. Regardless of the background, you're going to take the fort markers and you're going to place them on top of each of the 6 forts. So we have 1 here, we have 1 here, so we'll place an icon right there. And over towards the west side of the board, we'll see the other 3 forts that you'll start with. And so it will look like this once you're done. Next, the teams will place their muster stations. Now near Lake Ontario there, we'll see Oneida Carry. This is a town symbol. Anytime you see this little cross with little buildings, you're going to place, in this case since it's owned by the British, you will put the white muster station. It has a little triangle and it has 2 cubes. On the other side, this has 3 cubes. You want to make sure you place it on the 2 cube side, and you're going to place this right there. And the French side will place their 2 cube muster station on Saint Jean. We'll put it right there. And again, make sure that's the yellow 2 cubes for the French side. Next, each team will now place their second and last muster station, and they just have to go into a town that they control. So the British side, let's say they control this one because they've started here. This is a town symbol as I showed you. They can select any town symbol that they control, and they will place one of their muster stations, again, with their color. In this case, it's white for the British side, and the 2 cube side up. And then the French team will do the same, and they'll place it on one of their towns they control. In this case, they select Montreal, and they'll place their 2 yellow cube side up muster station there. Next, each player will take their 12 cards of their faction, shuffle them up, and they will draw 3 secretly into their hand. I have them down here so you can see them, but they're secret. You can always show your cards to your teammate. In this case, the 2 factions on the French side can show each other the cards and talk about things, about their strategy. Now, here we have 2 different types of cards. There's movements and there's events. If for some reason you've pulled 3 event cards, you show them to everybody else to show them that there are just event cards, and then you shuffle these back into your draw deck and you draw 3 cards again until you no longer have 3 event cards. Next, we're going to place additional units. The French factions each get to place 4 more units. They can place them in any French home area, or they can place them in any area that already has French units. And those units can be placed and split up into any amount of regions. Next, the British factions will do the same thing. 4 units of each faction into any home areas or areas where they have units, and they can be split up into multiple regions. Next, you'll find the 5 different turn cubes. And these are turn cubes, you know them because every face of all of these dice are all blank. You're going to take all 5 of these dice, and you're going to place them in this black drawstring bag. You're also going to take the wooden round cube and place it on all the way to the left onto round number 1. The game will be played between 3 and 8 rounds depending on what happens during the game, and each round, each faction is going to get 1 turn. You're trying to have the most control markers on the board at the end of the game, and you'll get those by controlling native lands or opponent's lands, and you'll stop your opponent by getting those by defending your homelands. Each round will consist of 5 different turn sequences, and those 5 sequences are made up of the 4 different factions in the game and the native faction. So what we'll do is we'll pull out one of the dice from the draw bag and we'll place it here. This shows you whose turn it is, and that is random. In this case, it is the French regulars, purple. The first phase of each turn sequence is the reinforcement phase. They're going to take 4 units of their color from their general supply from outside the game, and they're going to place them in different spots depending on which faction they are. In this case, we're the French regulars, so you can place your 4 reinforcements and split them up any way you see fit and place them into any harbor area that has no enemy units. So in this case, we could place some here if we'd like to, because there's no enemy units. We could not place them here because there are enemy units. Same with the British regulars. If you're on either of that regular side, you can place them in any of the harbor areas that don't have enemy units. And let's say the French regulars split the other 2 up like that. If you have run out of units from your general supply, you can only place as many as you have. If during the reinforcement phase you're running either the French Canadian or the British colonial factions, you'll place your reinforcements where your muster stations are. For every muster station, you'll place the amount of cubes in that area, assuming that there's no enemy cubes in that area. So in this case, if it was the French Canadians' turn, they would place 2 of their yellow reinforcements right there because it says 2 in their muster station, and they would place 2 more right there. And if you're the British colonials, you'd do the same. Now, we haven't talked about fleeing yet, but after you've placed your reinforcements, if you have cubes in this fled units box, you'll be able to pick them up for the active faction's turn and place them in either muster station. After the reinforcement phase, that player, who's in this case the French regulars, will move to the movement phase. On the movement phase, that player must play 1 and only 1 movement card. Here it shows us that up to 2 armies may move up to 2 areas. Now, when you move an army, you have to make sure that at least one of the units in the army is from your faction. So I have to have at least 1 purple unit when I make an army. This is a purple unit, and I can basically gather as many of these other ones, because these are all on my side for right now. We'll talk more about how the Native Americans work later, but essentially is if they're with you, they're allied. Now in this case, I could take these and move them, but I might not want to leave this whole area by itself, so maybe I just take this and 1 of these with me. So I can move up to 2 areas. So I could go 1, 2, and then be done. Now, I cannot drop off any units here, and then later on I cannot, even if I move this here, I couldn't use my second movement to then move these again. each unit can only be moved once per turn. But instead of going here and then stopping, let's say I move directly right to here. Anytime you come in contact with an area that has enemy units, you must stop and end your movement. Now there's going to be a battle here, but we're going to do all of our movements first and then resolve all possible battles. Now if you remember, both the French regulars and the British regulars, when they did reinforcements, they came in through the harbors. Now that means that both of those factions can actually move from the harbors to different regions. The other two factions cannot move. However, moving to and from a land area to a harbor, you can do. So let's say over the previous turns, some other units have moved into the harbor along with this, and this is one big army here. Now, when this wants to move over to here, well, it can also take any of its own sides. So in this case, it is the French Canadians, and here we have the natives. And we'll talk more about the natives in a minute, so we're just going to leave this one here for now, but you could bring those along if they're allied with you. We'll go more over that in just a moment. So in this case, let's say they move. It takes one movement. Now again, they can take this because it's their movement and they can move through water. It takes one movement to go into open water, and then it takes another movement to go into any of the other harbors. So in this case, it took them 2 movements to move that army to right here, and they would have had to have stopped anyway because there's enemy units. Now, if there's going to be more than one battle on a specific turn, the attacker gets to say which order it happens. Let's say they want to do this one first. Now, keep in mind that this is currently owned by the British because they were here first. They were by themselves at the beginning in a neutral place. And there's a fort here. This will come into play as well. The defender gets to roll first. Now, look at this. The white faction, the British colonials, they have 3 dice in total in the game. But since there's only 2 units here, they're only going to be able to use 2 dice. And so what's going to happen is the defender, which in this case is 1 red unit and 2 white units, are going to each roll their own die. So let's say this is the roll. We have a blank, which is a command action. We'll go over in just a moment. And we have 2 flees, which this means is that each of these white units are going to flee to the fled units area. Any units in the fled unit space will be placed back onto the map during the next reinforcement phase of that faction. Now back to the battle. We have a blank die here. That means it's a command result. That means you can, if you want to, move 1 unit to an adjacent area. Now those areas either have to have friendly units, or it could be into an empty allied home. So the red, this is red. If this was empty, they could have gone there. Or they could go to an empty native home. Since this is empty, they could go there. But in this case, they want to try to hang on and win the battle, so they decide to do nothing. Now that the defender is done, it goes to the attacker. Now when the attacker rolls, if the defender is in an area with a fort, the fort can add possible defense. So as the attacker is rolling, you are going to find the black fort die, and the defender is going to roll this die at the same time that the attacker rolls their die. So let's say the result looks like this. We have 2 bullseyes from the attacker, which normally would mean this player would be definitely dead. But first, let's see what happens. This player rolled a fort, and it will cancel out any one of these, so these 2 would cancel out. However, this one, the yellow player, still killed this one, and so this one would go away back into the general supply, keeping in mind that anytime the defender loses a unit, they get to decide which one was lost. In this case, they didn't have a choice because there was only 1 defending unit there. Now, this player has won this. It used to be held by the British side, but now it is a land that is now flipped over and now held by the French side. However, if you remember back when, this player before had a chance to possibly command out of here. Let's say they did that. If someone commands out and they have left this area that has a fort that they were the ones that was holding, they can decide to burn the fort down and take it out, which means this is still going to flip because this player now controls this, but the fort was burnt down, so they won't get extra defense. Then you would go to the next battle that the attacker says is going to happen that round. Now we just did 1 round of battling, but if it takes multiple times of going from defense to attack, you continue going back and forth from defense to the attacker until there's only 1 side left. Keep in mind, anytime that you're controlling a green neutral area that has a victory point symbol on it, you'll always place your control marker on there. However, for the other areas, like the red British or the purple French, and it has a victory point marker, it's only going to get a marker if the other team, meaning the non-home region to this, gets it. So in this case, there's not a marker here, but we have this. But let's say this army marched in here and took these guys out. Well, then there'd be a marker here. But then later on, if these guys came and took these out, you would just remove this marker because this is its homeland. Now, a few more things about movement. We talked about when you move your army into an area that has enemy units, you must stop. You must also stop if you move into a region that has one or more native units that are alone. And what this means is you have now allied with those native units because they were all alone and now they're on your side. So there can be some native units on the French side during the game and some in other areas that are allied with the British side. And now in a future turn, since you can't move them more than once on the turn, let's say this one had moved up to 2 and comes into here, and now this is part of that army, and so the green die will get ruled by the attacker here. Also, when moving, you'll see some spots on the board have darkened channels of water. This means that you can move through those as a normal move. In our example, all we did was a movement, but let's say we played an event card. On your turn, you can play as many event cards as you have in your hand. Remember, you only have 3 cards in your hand at the beginning of your round, but let's say we played this event, which says all moving armies may move 1 additional area this turn. The event card will typically tell you when to play it. It's usually pretty obvious. You just follow the rules on the card. So we could have moved up to 2 armies, up to 3 in this case. And now after you're done with the battle phase, we move to the draw cards phase. So essentially these go into a discard pile near me, and I will draw up so I have 3 cards. In this case, I would have played 2 cards, so I'll draw 2, so I have a total of 3 cards for next round. And just like during the start of the game, anytime you draw cards, if the 3 cards that are in your hand, now that you've drawn, are 3 event cards, meaning you have no movement cards, you must show these cards to the opponents, and then shuffle them back into your draw deck and draw 3 cards again, and hopefully you have at least 1 movement card. If not, continue doing this. That would have ended the French regulars' turn, so we're going to start over with the turn sequence, and we pull, let's say, the green die out. Now these are the natives. Anytime you pull this out, you're going to place 3 native units in both spots on the board that have this signifier. And as you can see over the board, you'll see the different signifiers that you'll see on that turn sequence track, but here is the one that we had. So we're going to go ahead and place the 3 there. We'll also place 3 more in the other spot on the board that has that signifier. Now that would end the native's turn, and then we'd continue by drawing the next one and going through all of the phases of that player's turn. And since this was the first round and it's the end, all of these would get taken up, put back in the bag, and we would start round number 2. So let's say we just ended round number 3. Starting with round number 3 and every round thereafter, noticing they have a different icon than here, we check to see if the end game condition is triggered. Now when playing the card on your turn, you might play a card that says truce. Each faction has a truce card. Of course, it's shuffled in your deck so you don't know when it's going to be in your hand. Normally you'd move 3 armies up to 2 spots. However, if you play a truce card after this, you place it over to the side of the board. If at the end of every round between 3 through 8, there's both truce cards from either both factions or one faction, that triggers the end of the game. In this case, we have the French regulars and the French Canadians. They're from the same team, and since both factions from the same single team has played it throughout the game will now end. Of course, if all 4 truce cards are out from all 4 factions, it would end as well, but as soon as there's both factions of the same side has the truce card that has been played, between rounds 3 and 8, it ends. At this point, you'd count up all the control markers. Whoever has the most out there is the winner. If it's tied, then the game ends in a draw. Now, if you'd like to play a short introductory game, each faction only gets cards 7 through 10 of there. So they're only going to have 4 cards, and then the game ends at the end of the second round. Well, I hope this helped you dive right into the game, skipping the rulebook and getting to the fun faster. Now, if you still have questions about the rules, I've placed a link in the description of this video, and that location will help you out because not only will I see them and be able to answer them, but so will the publisher and developers.